Face to face, I'm Niresh Aliyatambi. No politician has ever won the presidency of Sri Lanka without winning the Gampaha district, the district which is just next to Colombo, heavily industrialized and with an immense population, and it's just across the Kalani River and stretches all the way to the Mahawaya, the Negombo area. So in this election that's coming up, the presidential election, Gampaha will once again be key to the fortunes of the different candidates. And to tell us more about the mood of the Gampaha voter, we have with us today Dr. Nalaka Godahewa, who set quite a record when he contested from the Gampaha district in the last general election and won more than 300,000 votes and came into parliament. Welcome, Dr. Nalaka.
Thank you very much.
So, Dr. Nalaka, what's the mood of the Gampaha voter this time?
Niresh, Gampaha, as you very correctly said, is a very important district when it comes to elections, because currently it is the largest district which has the highest number of voters. We have about 1.7 million registered voters, of which assumption is at least 1.4 million will vote this time, and whoever wants to win the presidential election has to win this district. Last time it was a landslide for SLPP, which got at both elections, presidential as well as parliamentary election, more than 850,000 votes, and they won with a huge margin. But this time situation is changing, because it has a educated voter base, lot of government servants, private sector employees, more or less a kind of a middle class educated population. They are kind of politically literate compared to some other districts. So you can expect Gampaha district to determine the trend island wide, and I think this time they are eagerly waiting for the presidential election, which is likely to be the first election to be held after some time.
Now, Gampaha is also a multi-ethnic, multi-religious district, isn't it? It's a microcosm of Sri Lanka itself, because you have the Catholic belt, you have the interior, which is heavily Sinhala Buddhist, you have a lot of Muslim pockets as well, so it's got all the religions, and it's also got a lot of people from Colombo who have moved out of Colombo and are now living in the Vattala and Kadawatha and those areas. So would you describe it as this melting pot of cultures of Sri Lanka?
Absolutely, it's a excellent example for multicultural, multi-religious district. On the coastal belt, you have most of the Catholics of Sri Lanka living in that area, and a substantial Muslim population as well, and vast majority are Buddhist. So all these influences will be there at an election, and the 13 electorates. Some are primarily Buddhist electorates, some are like electorates like Negombo, very much Catholic based. Muslim population is spread out across several electorates, but overall it will be an excellent reflection of how the Sri Lankan voters will vote.
Now let's talk about your old party, the SLPP, which is struggling at the moment. I know you are no longer part of that party, but what's going on with it? What alliances are being formed? Who are they going to support? We have heard that they will be supporting President Wickramasinghe. What's the exact situation?
I think SLPP is going through a very difficult time. If you go back to the origins of SLPP, it was built around former President Mahinda Rajapaksa. Former President Mahinda Rajapaksa was kind of betrayed by his own lieutenants at the 2015 after 2015 election, after President Maithripala Sirisena won the election, most of President Mahinda Rajapaksa's supporters went and aligned with President Sirisena. So SLPP, or in short that we know as Pohottuwa, was built around Mahinda Rajapaksa with Mahinda Rajapaksa loyalists, and they did extremely well at the last presidential election, where Gotabaya Rajapaksa, brother of Mahinda Rajapaksa, contested as the presidential candidate, and then followed by the general election. But right now they have again the same betrayal problem. Now again a large chunk of their people who were originally hardcore supporters of Mahinda Rajapaksa are aligning with the current president Ranil Wickremesinghe. So it must be hurting the Rajapaksa family a lot. They're going through the same experience once again, and with the learnings earlier, there's a very strongly likelihood they will again look for loyalty, and they may not support Ranil Wickremesinghe's candidacy, in my opinion, whereas a large number of ministers, MPs in their party would want to go with President Ranil Wickremesinghe once again. So there's going to be a clear split that will affect the next election.
Now, Dr. Nalaka, your party, when you broke away from the SLPP, you were all set to contest the local government elections, which were called, and nominations were called, and there was a deadline for nominations, and we are still technically under the election law of that particular poll, but the election was never held. Very strangely, I would call it a betrayal of the people and democracy, but it was never held. How important are the local government polls, especially in a district like Gampaha?
See, local government election is a requirement of the democracy. The people must be represented by their elected representatives at grassroots level. So postponing local government elections is a major betrayal of the democratic process, in my opinion. It has happened, and so far there is absolutely no sign of elections are going to be held. But when it comes to the next step after the presidential election and the parliament election, definitely whoever comes to the power will want to have the local government election, but there will be a problem for most of the parties except one or two parties. All other parties who formed alliances for the local government election are no longer together. They also have now got into different alliances. So it will be a very tricky question, what will happen if the local government elections are going to be held under the current nomination list. The old parties will not have a major problem, but even in their cases, some may have left and joined other parties. So it's going to be a tricky situation when the elections are to be held next round.
So it all rests in the hands of the Elections Commission, doesn't it? Whether those nominations are to be cancelled, or the elections to be held with those nominations. It's quite tricky, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the Election Commission who have to take the decision, but I think whoever come to power will also make a decision because of the problem that I mentioned, because it's going to be confusing. It is very likely that they may want to go for fresh nominations, and with the new delimitations, and there's scope for fresh nominations.
Now let's talk a bit more about the Gampaha district and the industrial base. The district comprises a lot of industrial zones, Katunayaka and Ekala and so on, which were hit very hard by the economic catastrophe. First COVID, and then of course the bankruptcy of the government of Sri Lanka. What's the situation now? Has that turned around, or is it still are the people still suffering because of loss of jobs and so on?
After 1977, Gampaha district was the base for most of the new industries that were coming up. New industrial zones, new factories, garment factories and various other things. And today if you look at all the districts in the country, Gampaha is the most industrialized district, where something like 36% of the population has some kind of a linkage to some industry. So when the industrial sector got affected after COVID and the Aragalia in 2021-22 period, the majority of the people in Gampaha district got affected economically. A lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of people lost their businesses, and the self-employed people who were supplying some items to these factories etc. also lost their income. So I would say Gampaha district is very badly affected, was very badly affected due to the situation in the country, and now they are all hoping for an economic revival. So that is why the forthcoming election is also very important for them, because economy is the main issue which will determine whom they are going to support.
Now, Dr. Nalaka, you are not a typical Sri Lankan politician. You were actually in the private sector. You were the CEO of an apparel company, well-known one, and then you joined the government sector, so to speak. You were appointed chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, and then chairman of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and you were also on the boards. I think you were managing director of Sri Lanka Insurance. So you've been in different fields, and you have this wide experience. And I believe you have a PhD in economics from the University of South Australia. So you're highly qualified and experienced. Tell us how this country's economy could be turned around, because we hear a lot of posturing by the various political parties, but they seem to speak in concepts. For example, they say we will eradicate corruption. So that's a concept. It's something which we'd all love to do, but there's no sure way of doing it. In the same way, they say we will bring in new foreign investments. How do you do that? How do you go step by step in this?
See, Niresh, I think one of the key problems that I find with the current government is the very issue that you raised. We are talking all the time about this debt restructuring, etc., but nobody's actually focusing on what to do to get our economy back on track, because we are not independent. We are dependent on what's happening around the world. Today the whole world is linked to each other, and our primary problem being the dollar crisis. We have to first of all concentrate and find out from where can we earn more foreign revenue. Local currency we can somehow manage, because we have certain natural advantages, so people can somehow survive, but we have to find out ways to bring foreign currency. There, I think first thing we have to understand is what are our strengths. What are our strengths that will help us to make foreign revenue and concentrate on those areas. See, for example, now all of us know the advantage that we have with our geographic location. But do you hear anything in the recent past as to how we are going to capitalize on that? For example, the ports, airports, related businesses, logistics, that is where we can actually set a target, let's say a $1 billion target for a certain period of time and work on it. Tourism, of course, people are talking about it, tourism is growing, but there's so much more that you can do. You can do that with more greater strategic approach. That, and then we have our educated population. We are a highly literate society. People learn very fast. Our youngsters are quite capable of learning things very fast, and we have to identify industries which suits our country. For example, if you take the IT sector, our neighboring country, India, generates more money from the IT sector than Saudi Arabia generates from oil. They are last, if I remember correct, they generated something like 160 billion or so dollars from the IT sector, and our IT sector was also growing at one point. We had set a target by 2022. We were talking about making our IT industry a $5 billion industry. Then what did we do? The current government, after Aragle, in the economic reforms, went and imposed a 30% tax on the IT industry, which didn't have any tax before that. It was zero tax. You went and imposed a 30% tax, basically killing an industry which can which could have helped you a lot on this economic recovery. So essentially, to cut a long story short, what I would say is our prioritization of industries is very poor at the moment. That is where we need to focus on.
So going on that line, which industries would best suit Sri Lanka and Sri Lankans? What are we good at? We hear this, various political leaders say, oh, let's make Sri Lanka a banking hub, an education hub, tourism hub, all kinds of hubs. We seem to want to do everything. But what are we really good at? And are those industries something which sells? Is it something that the world needs?
Definitely. Now if I go back to the industry that I mentioned, look at the logistics sector. Because of our location, logistics is an area, the global logistics, as a global logistics center, we have enormous scope to develop. Right? We are on the path of one of the busiest naval routes, even for air traffic. Excellent location. But to develop that, you have to have a master strategy. And we never talk about a master strategy. Master strategy involves a lot of things, regulations, the facilities, the infrastructure, training, all those things. So that's one area where you can develop. Then again, as I said, our skilled employee base. Now we send a lot of people for unskilled jobs. Again, we know that we need to send more skilled people abroad. But what do? Now simple things like sending nurses, training nurses and sending abroad. How long we have been talking about it without doing anything? So there are definitely areas where we can piggyback on our strengths and do, but you need to have national strategies for these segments.
Well, is it that the president of the day, and I'm not just speaking about this president, but the last one and so on, is it that they are not setting the the economic agenda very clearly, where Sri Lankans, and especially the businesses, the businessmen and women in Sri Lanka, are not quite certain of the direction the country is taking economically?
See, what we always lack is setting targets for industries. Now when it comes to the country, I think one good thing that has come out from the IMF proposals is we have identified certain targets for the macroeconomy, which is good. Of course, those targets are debatable. The next government might want to have a fresh look at those targets and make certain changes. But as a concept, having certain macroeconomic targets is a good thing. But when it comes to industries, still it is not there. I think this is where we need to work on. For every sector, every segment, we need to set specific targets and timelines and work towards that. That's the only way we can get out of this crisis.
Now, the projections for economic growth in Sri Lanka are pretty dismal, very disappointing. This year, somewhere around 2%, maybe a little more. Next year, something a little better than that. But we are barely going beyond 3%, which is really not good enough. Neighboring India is growing this year at 6.3%. Bangladesh is growing over 6%. Maldives and so on. So we are in this fastest growing region in the world, but we are just meandering along at 2 to 3%, and the projections for the next 2 to 3 years are not very promising. And GDP growth, of course, directly impacts on foreign exchange and on jobs, the number of jobs. We need hundreds of thousands of new jobs every year. How do we set targets for this?
I fully agree with you, Naresh. We are very lukewarm in setting these targets. If you look at the targets that we have agreed with IMF, they're very easily achievable. Even at the current rate, most of these targets will be met, and all the indications are these targets will be met, but that is not going to help the country. Achieving these low targets is not going to help the economy. See, our economy contracted continuously for 3 to 4 years now. Then from that contracted position to recover, we must be far more ambitious than this. First of all, you can first get back to where you were 3 years ago. So that for that you don't have to set very low targets and accept whatever is there. You have to be ambitious and work towards that. I strongly believe if you set ambitious targets and work under a proper plan, at least for the next 3 to 5 years, we can have a far better growth rate than what we have agreed with IMF. You sustaining that in the long run is a different story. It all depends on how you manage your economy, how you plan, how you work towards it. But at least next 2 to 3 years, recovery has to be much faster than this.
No, Dr. Nalaka, one of the serious problems that we in Sri Lanka have had over our 76 years of independence, perhaps, is that our politicians tend to ignore the advice of professionals, and the professionals themselves are ignored. They are not given their due place, or very few of them are, and then the professionals sort of fade away from governance and go back to their private sector or their universities or their professions. And the scenario is that politicians then rule. They don't serve, they rule, and they do whatever they want, and they take the country in whatever direction they feel like, which is very often going round in circles, because they lack the knowledge. Politicians don't have the kind of knowledge, they don't have degrees or PhDs in economics or something like that. Now you were part of one experiment, the Viatmaga, which again, it started off very promisingly, but then once President Gotabaya Rajapaksa became president, he seemed to ignore a lot of their advice, and those professionals faded away. Right now we see several opposition parties, the NPP, the SJB and so on. They've got large groups of professionals who have come together. Many of them from overseas. There's a lot of Sri Lankan scientists and so on from overseas who have actually contributed a lot towards setting these new policies for parties. But what would happen? Do you have any faith in the winning party? Let's say it's the one that you're going to be supporting, the Samagi Jana Sandhaniya. Would that actually place those professionals in a pride of place?
See, one thing that I learned through experience, Naresh, is that there's no point blaming the professionals who were kind of support base for these politicians, because most of the politicians don't listen to advisors once they come to power, and that's a reality. So the answer to that is you send professionals to parliament, you appoint professionals to cabinet, you make them run the country, and that's the only way that works. If you look at other countries, look at the developed world. I mean, if you look at a cabinet minister of a developed country, they're always coming from good universities, good education backgrounds. Look at the prime ministers, ministers, and if you don't have that, there's no point blaming the advisors. of course, in the previous government and the governments before, you had advisors. But the politician, if he's not capable of firstly understanding what these advisors are and also not willing to accept those things, there's no point blaming the advisors, because the advisor doesn't have the power of implementation. So this is something that our voters also should understand. Voters are also looking for politicians who are traditional, who will meet their traditional requirements, and they always send them to parliament again and again and again, and they blame the system. Whereas there are many opportunities to select good people and send out of the choices. So that's what they should do.
We are in conversation with Dr. Nalaka Godahewa. We'll take a short commercial break right now and we'll be right back.
ඔච්චර ලස්සනට වැදගත් පාටට ඇඳලා මොකද බොත්තම් අරන් යන්නේ?
මරණ එක කොහොම වෙතත් ඔය පැත්තෙන් ඩිවෝස් කේස් එකවත් ෆයිල් කරලා පෙන්නනවාකෝ.
බංගෝ මරනවා. මරණයක මරනවා. මල් ළඟ යතුරක් තියාගෙන අනිත් යතුර තමුන්ට දුන්නේ ඕන වෙලාවට යන්නයි එන්නයි. අය කෝල් කරලා අහන්න දෙයක් නැහැ නේ.
කියා දෙන්න ආදරේ තරම් අද රාත්‍රියට ඉදියට
සිරස ටෙලිතිරයෙන්.
Always remember, life is the ultimate quiz. Central College, Piliandala, Banganayaka College, Gampaha, St. Aloysius College, Gaul. මෙම නව බැරොක් පනේ ගොඩනැගිල්ල කොළඹ කොටුව ප්‍රදේශයේ පිහිටා ඇත.
පාලන පාර්ලිමේන්තුව?
Correct. අපම ඉන්දියානු චෝල පාලනය සාර්ථකව අවසන් කළේය.
පළවෙනි විජය බාහු රජු?
Correct.
ඉගෙන ගන්න එකත් ඒ වගේම සතුටින් කරන්න ඕනේ. You have to enjoy what you learn. If you don't enjoy, you can't learn.
Be the change that you always want to see in this world.
Brainbusters with Slits Season 4 Saturday at 6:30 p.m. on TV1.
සිම්පත හරියට ලියාපදිංචි කරගෙන තියෙන්න ඕන. සමහරව එහෙම දන්නෙත් නැහනේ.
මේ සිම්පත කොයිතරම් වැදගත්ද කියලා මේ දුරකථන පාවිච්චි කරන හැම දෙනාම දන්නේ නැහැ කියලා තමයි මම කියන්නේ.
මැයි වලින් පස්සේ ලොකු ගංවතුර තත්ත්වයක් එන්න නියමිතයි කියලා. කාලකුණ විද්‍යාඥයින් අනතුරු අංගවන පසුබිමක ඔබ කොයි විදිහටද මේ අපේ තෙත්බිම් සම්බන්ධයෙන් දකින්නේ?
කොළඹ නගරයේ තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් 21%ක් තියෙන නාගරික තෙත්බිම් වලින් වැසි ජලයෙන් 39%ක් රඳවා ගන්න බව.
දැන් විලද නගරයට කටයුතු කරන කට්ටිය දැන් එනවා පරිපාලන නගරයට. ඔතන දන්න හැටි අපි ගත්තොත් අරවටු කොට එහෙම නැත්නම් කිඹුලවල ප්‍රදේශයේ අපිට තියෙනවා රැයට කෑම කඩ. ඉස්සර ඒක තිබ්බේ කොහෙද? කොළඹ. දැන් ගොඩ දෙනෙක් මේ පැත්තට එන්න පටන් ගන්නවා. මොකද ඒගොල්ලන්ට අර කොළ පාට ගතිය. මේ තියෙන බ්‍රීස් එක කියන්නේ එඟට දැනෙන වෙනස අනිවාර්යෙන් දැනෙනවා.
ජාතික මෙහෙවර සතියේ දිනවල උදෑසන 11ට.
Welcome back to Face to Face. We are in conversation with Dr. Nalaka Godahewa, Member of Parliament from the Gampaha district. Dr. Nalaka, before the break, you were talking about the voters needing to be more discerning. But with the Aragalaya, the cry from the voters, the masses, was that everybody out and fresh blood to come in. Now when they say all 225 out, I'm sure all 225 are not going out, but we may see maybe 100 new faces. How does the voter sift through this? Because in the end there'll be the nomination lists, and we'll see all the posters on the walls and everywhere as usual. You'll see them on programs like this, and then the voter has to go on election day and you have all these lists. I'm talking of the general election, of course. How does the voter actually decide? What are the criteria for this?
See, first of all, talking about this cry against the 225 people in the parliament, one thing that we must understand is there's absolutely no point blaming all 225 MPs in the parliament for what has happened. in the country, because the country is managed by a limited number of people, essentially the cabinet. Right? The parliamentary MP is a legislator who supports the legislative process, but he is not necessarily a part of the executive arm. Executive arm is the president and the cabinet. The problem had always been in the past is when appointing cabinet members, parties used to look at seniority and people who were there for a very long period, and some of those people were not necessarily equipped to handle the current challenges. I may not name, but if you look at some of the finance ministers for the last several decades, see who were the finance ministers, were the economists. Did they understand the issue? Take the last finance minister before the crisis. I don't think he had any clue that there's a crisis was looming. So that is where the problem is. So first of all, we must put pressure on the next government, put the right people into the cabinet, people who understand their subjects, who come with a good strong educational background. Then a lot of things will change. I remember an example when I won Gampaha with 325,497,000 votes, with so much private sector experience, so much government sector experience and education qualifications. I was told by former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa 2 days before the election that he will find it difficult to appoint me to the cabinet because his brother was insisting on bringing seniors to the cabinet. He was upset about it, but he was kind of forced into that. So what was the final outcome? We were not there in the decision making body. The whole system collapsed and we got the blame as if we were not part of it. We were out. So voters, coming back to your question, in the nomination list there are always good people. Even in the current parliament, there are a lot of good professionals. There are educated people who are capable people, and even look at the current cabinet, there are some very young, good ministers who seem to be doing their jobs well. So select out of them. So you can't say you didn't have a choice, but do you select the right people is the question.
Now, Sri Lankan leaders often talk about emulating Singapore. Singapore has done this, so we should do the same, and we hope to be like Singapore in so many years' time. But when you look at the Singaporean cabinet, it is full of leaders who have not just a basic degree, but I believe almost every single one of them has a master's degree. And when you read their biographies, you realize that they've got master's degrees from the top universities, from Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, Yale, the National University of Singapore, and universities like that. So they are professionals more than they are politicians. How do we get a cabinet like that?
See, even from within the current parliament, you can pick a good cabinet. There are qualified people, but as I mentioned earlier, this mind block that you have to look at the seniority is the issue. I have a feeling next government, if the alliance that I support wins, might be different because they understand the problem. They are looking for people who can understand the specific areas, and if all parties understand what has gone wrong and try to correct that, it is possible. Now coming back to what you mentioned, Singapore, Malaysia experience, and not only Singapore, Malaysia, look at the India experience in the 1980s. The leaders who made those economic changes, like Lee Kuan Yew of Singapore, Cambridge educated, Mahathir Mohamad, a PhD, then Dr. Manmohan Singh, who changed India's economy. They're all educated people who understand their functions. That is where we have gone wrong. So we need to make an effort to change that.
And you firmly believe that the party you are supporting would bring about change in the required fashion?
I have a feeling, and particularly when we engage in various discussions internally, I can see there's a greater understanding of the problem. If I just compare the previous government that I supported, which is still in power, one of the problems was the leaders did not understand the issues deeply. Now, if you take Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, in my personal opinion, a good leader, a person who loved the country, and not a corrupt guy, but he lacked understanding of the economy. So that is why he was kind of misguided by one or two people who were working with him. So that, I believe, will not happen with the next leader. We are supporting Honorable Sajid Premadasa as the presidential candidate. Now, Mr. Sajid Premadasa understands economics. He is a graduate in economics. He understands economics, and he has a knowledge to lead a team. That is where I see it will be different.
Now, another aspect which strikes me is that politicians, even if they get a basic degree like a law degree or something like that, they do stop learning after that, don't they? Because they are into politics, they are into becoming a cabinet minister. They don't actually go on to get masters and PhDs and so on. That's very rare. So they do stop learning. Whereas if you do, if you're a professional, you would do your CIM, CIMA, get an MBA, and so on and so forth, and that's all knowledge. So in a sense, our cabinet is therefore of a lower grade every time in comparison to our neighboring countries, which are competitors in this world today. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think the learning is important, and it has to be a continuous process. If you take a look at myself, even Niresh, now I have education qualifications in 7 different disciplines, and I continue to learn. After entering Parliament, having won 325,000 plus votes, I completed a degree whilst I was in the Parliament, in a degree in law, and I'm right now following my attorneys. That is because it is not to be employed somewhere with that knowledge, because that knowledge is important. As legislators, I felt that it is important for me to gain a greater knowledge in the field of law. Likewise, I find there are several other MPs who are also continuously studying, which is a good thing, though the outside world doesn't know. I like to see more people doing that. More people should do that, because the world is changing, subject matter is changing, and unless we continuously upgrade our knowledge in whatever the area we are expected to serve the public, we can't perform at our best.
Now, Dr. Nalaka, you have worked overseas in several countries, I believe in India, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, and all these are countries which are experiencing high growth rates. Wonderfully high growth rates, and they are actually Sri Lanka's competitors in a way. Vietnam, where you worked, I believe, is a direct competitor for our apparel industry. Indonesia is also somewhat of a competitor. India certainly is now far more advanced than we are in many aspects, but they also offer us a huge opportunity as a market. How do we, first of all, compete with them, and how do we gel with them and become part of one South Asian economic community, South Asia and Southeast Asia?
See, the world is converging. Today, if you look at any industry, the industries are linked globally and to global supply chains. So if you want to be part of this process, you have to build your linkages with all these countries, and I think this is quite doable, because as I mentioned at the very early, Sri Lanka has a literate population, so we can learn things fast. So what is important is to identify the right sectors, negotiate and bring the right investors, and to facilitate them on these processes. So then things will start moving. Now that you mentioned Vietnam, I remember my experience in Vietnam in the 2003, 2004, 2005 period. I had to go to Vietnam as a CEO of a apparel company looking for investment opportunities. I had a challenge to set up an operation and deliver certain orders. And when I went to Vietnam, I came across a company called Vietnam Singapore Industrial Park. I went through advice of a Singaporean friend, and that company helped me to set up that operation within 2 weeks. Can you believe? In the third week, we were in operation. We went there. Within 1 or 2 days, we identified the location, set up the company. They gave us even, they loaned us equipment and some temporary employees for us to start the operation. That's the mindset. So Sri Lanka also must have that kind of mindset. And if we all understand we have gone through a struggle, our country has to fight back and to grow. And if we have the commitment, we also can do these things.
But now you spoke of the need to fight back. But aren't we still fighting each other? Because you hear of so many instances of corruption and mismanagement, which is happening right now. It's been happening over the last 2.5 years. Since you would think that with the Aragalaya and the country's bankruptcy that there was really nothing more to steal from the government. But of course we still have our national budget, and there seems to be a lot of corruption going on, and some people say that it's even far worse now than it was earlier, because you have all these purchases happening without proper tender procedures, urgent or emergency purchases. So is there a huge problem here, a national problem of Sri Lankans not coming together?
No, you're absolutely right, Naresh. You hit it right on the nail. I think after Aragalaya, if Aragalaya was to change the system, what happened after Aragalaya, it created enormous opportunity for those people who are corrupt to exploit the system. Today, nothing is happening based on formal tender processes. Everything is based on unsolicited proposals and through cabinet papers. And the reason why we don't get to know about most of corrupt deals is not even the officers are aware as to what's happening, because everything is happening through cabinet papers. And the current VSF visa agreement is a classic example. Now until it surfaced with some incident in the airport, nobody knew what was going on. So likewise, there's so much corruption that continues to happen, and we need to put a stop to that. No country can stop corruption completely, but we must bring some strong rules as to how we are going to punish the people who are involved in these things and move forward.
Now you spoke about getting an operation started, a business operation started in Vietnam within 2 weeks, but in Sri Lanka you're lucky if you can start something in 2 years. Most business operations take even longer. How do we get there to where Vietnam is? How do we convince entrepreneurs to come here that they can set up within 2 weeks? What do we need to do to make that happen?
No, I think you need to go and correct the limitations in our system. I think what happened was, when let's look at this BOI zone system, economic zone system, when it started after 1970s, things were happening fast, and there were a lot of powers given to these institutes through laws. But subsequently, over the years, various ministries came into the picture and started getting involved, and the power got redistributed, and eventually nobody was responsible. And this is one thing that has to be changed. New regulations have to be coming, systems must be put in place, and the authority must be given to few people to take decisions, and they must be held accountable for their decisions. So if these things can be done, I don't think it is that much difficult to get these things back on track.
But holding people accountable seems to be a tremendous challenge in Sri Lanka. This is not so in many other countries. Of course, there are many countries where it's even worse than Sri Lanka. But if you were to take, say, the United States or Europe, officials are held accountable. And if I may take one recent example, the head of the US government Secret Service did not resign for more than a week, despite the abject failure to protect former President Trump. And of course, even though she didn't want to resign, the Congress, the special committee which investigated this, kept on they kept on telling her repeatedly that she needs to go. And then finally she bowed to that pressure and she did resign. So perhaps it was a little late, but it did happen. But in Sri Lanka, what we see is the other politicians, other cabinet ministers, presidents, prime ministers, they group together to protect the wrongdoer. This is, I mean, a case in point was the pharmaceutical scandal which erupted. I mean, people died because of that scandal. But the president did very little, and finally it was the courts which acted, and that minister is now undergoing the judicial process. How do you prevent the other politicians from banding together and protecting the wrongdoer?
See, one of the things that you can make improvements there is the parliamentary committee system, where I think now with this parliamentary committees being aired live, people know what's happening there. But there's a problem. Even though certain issues come up at these committees and discussed, there is no legal room to take action on that. Let's assume there's the Government Sector Institute, where you find a huge scandal, some issue, and that has been discussed at a parliamentary committee like COPE, and they highlight this issue, present a paper to the parliament, it dies there. Nothing happens beyond that. Instead, I think this is something for a future government to change. There must be a system when a report like that comes to the parliament, there must be a special prosecutor or somebody who can take it from there and proceed and file action against these people and follow up. And if those systems can be brought in place, most of these accountability issues can be sorted out. Right now it is only talk, no action beyond that.
So you've pointed out a very interesting lacuna in the entire system, Dr. Nalaka. We in the media reveal a lot of things. In social media you get a lot of revelations as well, and in the parliamentary committees and so on, the opposition speaks of it on the floor of parliament, but then it just simply dies there because the Attorney General's department simply doesn't take any action. This is the sort of thing where, you know, we had IGPs in the past who would say, well, just hearing about a crime or reading about it in the newspaper is not enough for the police to go and investigate. They need a written complaint in a police station, which is actually not true. I come from a long line of police officers myself, and that is absolutely not true. Police officers are empowered to investigate any crime that they hear about. They don't need somebody to come to the police station or the CID and actually make a complaint. So why isn't the Attorney General, and I'm not talking about just this Attorney General, but Attorneys General in the past as well, why don't they take action?
Actually, I don't think it is fair for us to blame the Attorney General or these independent commissions. There's a small gap that has to be filled yet. These committees do study these issues and come up with good reports. And actually most of those reports I have found, they've gone into great detail about the issues and they're solid reports. But the lacuna is to direct the Aegis department, direct the bribery commission and the relevant authorities. There's no a legal process which has to be introduced through fresh legislation. And actually this is not something that I come up with, that has been discussed, raised by many MPs even in the past. So I hope in future governments will look at that and correct that. Otherwise all these committees are not going to serve a purpose finally.
Yes, because we seem to be the land of revelations.
Absolutely.
We have sugar scam, garlic scam, bun scam, practically every type of product, every vegetable, every fruit, there is a scam to it, and that's awful. We are the land of scams, but everything gets revealed and then nothing happens. So that's I mean, the world must be laughing at us, and we're not likely to get a lot of investment either. One final question, Dr. Nalaka, as we are unfortunately running out of time. You were the chairman of Sri Lanka Tourism, and I must ask you, this is a low-hanging fruit, tourism. Tourists come, you don't even have to ask them to come. Now Sri Lanka is gaining a lot of tourists, and they do come and spend some amount of money, not as much as we'd like perhaps, but they do come, and our tourism product is reasonable, the hotels and so on, but how do we improve this? How do we get the high spenders, and how do we get, well, we were aiming at something like 2.5 million tourists this year, I believe. How do we get up to about 4 million, 5 million of high spending tourists? Because again, President Wickremesinghe has set certain targets, but it's not quite clear what the process should be to get there.
See, I was chairman tourism from 2011 to 2010-2012 period. That was immediately after the war. At that time I developed a tourism development plan which a specific target was taking the number of tourism arrivals, which was around 400,000 then, to 2.5 million by 2016. And we set the target first and then identified what was the strategic gap. And we were working on that, and I was very successful. Within 2 years we reached something like 1.5 million tourists. Then I was moved to another challenge to manage the Securities Exchange Commission. Unfortunately I couldn't continue in that job, which I loved most. See, what is important is to understand, to improve in tourism is not only talking about first time tourists. What is more important is repeat tourism. So how can we make sure a tourist who come to Sri Lanka, see these places, come back again and again and again, and also word of mouth. How do we get the tourists who have come to Sri Lanka to promote Sri Lanka? That is where a lot of work is still to be done on our product. Our product has to be improved, the product quality has to be better, service aspect has to be better. Even though we say we have so many things, we have heritage, we have scenery, we have wildlife, all those things, the experience of a tourist who come to Sri Lanka, I don't think is good enough for them to come back again. Take a classic example. Our wildlife is one of the best in the world, but tourists who go to Yala, do you think they'll come back again? They see a high traffic area inside Yala, because that is not managed properly. So many people enter, harassing even the wildlife. So the product is mismanaged. So they are not going to come back again. So one thing I wanted to do when I was chairman tourism was to have a greater emphasis on the product development and get all the line agencies, line ministries involved in this strategy. And I think that is something that Tourist Board and the Tourism Ministry has to do, get everybody together, focus on not only bringing tourists to the country, but increase repeat tourism.
Much food for thought indeed from Dr. Nalaka Godahewa, my guest this evening. Thank you very much for joining us and spending the time. and thank you to you at home who have been watching. And don't go away, the news is coming up next. Have a good evening.